Elsie Briar woke in the grey before dawn to fog dripping from the eaves, a slow, patient tapping that had carried on long enough to become part of the room. Her room was small and cold, and entirely her own. One window on the lane, a chest for her clothes, a peg for her cloak, and she lay still a moment under the blanket, sorting the day before the day could sort her. Bread from Hob, stew meat from Ned, candles if Thomas remembered, and he always remembered. She rose and dressed in the dark, wool skirt and good boots, and the apron folded over her arm, tied her hair back once, and let herself out into a lane so thick with fog that the houses across the way had softened to smudges. The walk to the square took longer in fog, or seemed to. She passed shuttered windows, and one lit one, heard a dog complain somewhere behind the Softwick lane, and came into the marketplace as the stalls were waking, canvas snapping back, crates thumping down on trestle boards, somebody's cart horse blowing long and unhappy in the wet. The air smelled of river, wet wool, and fish from Cale Drift's barrow, and under all of it, faint and warm, bread. Hop Crumb's shop glowed at its seams, the one warm colour left in the square. Flour dusted his forearms to the elbow, and he was already pulling the second bake when she came through the door with her basket. 6 for midday, he said, counting the loaves out onto the cloth without being asked. 4 for the travellers, and 2 more besides, because that corner table of Oren's eats like it pays. He wiped one hand down his apron and looked at her over the loaves. It does not pay, does it? It pays in time, Elsie said. Oren keeps the accounts. Oren keeps secrets and calls them accounts. But he said it fondly. Hop complained about Oren the way he complained about damp mornings, daily and without any wish for it to change. As he tied the cloth over the basket, the flour hanging above the kneading board gathered into a pale ring, held for a breath, and let itself down again. Dust settling in a shop where dust knew its work. Neither of them remarked on it. She had watched kettles boil before. She paid him from Oren's purse, counted the coppers into his floury palm, and went back out into the fog, with the basket riding her hip. Med Marrow had the stew meat wrapped in waxed paper before she had finished naming the cut, which was his way of telling her he had been expecting her since first light. He was a big man with careful hands, and he leaned on the block while she tucked the parcel into the basket. "How is his shoulder?" he asked. "Mending. He says it never ached." He would say that. Ned turned a knife over on the block, not doing anything with it, just turning it. "Tell him a man who lifts casks with a bad shoulder gets a worse one. Tell him I said so." She said she would tell him, knowing she would and knowing too what good it would do. Men would sooner lose the arm than the argument, in her experience, and Oren Barleywick had more practice arguing than most. 2 stalls down, Thomas Alderwick pressed 3 candles into her free hand and waved away half the coin, declaiming to the square at large, "A candle for the pot, a candle for the stair, and a candle for the lass with the fog in her hair." A child in a too-big coat giggled at him from behind a crate of turnips. Elsie thanked him and moved on. She was fond of Thomas, the way you are fond of rain that never falls on you, and she had tables waiting at the other end of the walk. At the well, she nearly walked into Corin Softwick. He was coming around the coping with his arms full and his mind elsewhere, and the topmost ledger was already sliding toward the wet stones. She caught it against her basket before it landed. "Oh," he said. "Oh, I am sorry. I did not. It is you. Thank you." He juggled the stack level, rescued an ink bottle from his own cuff by a finger's width, and thanked her again. "Thank you twice." 3 times, usually, Elsie said, and gave the ledger back. He laughed the way he did, half apology, and hurried off toward the mare's lane, and she watched him a moment to be sure nothing else escaped him. Brenner and Holt Westbrook were crossing the square with a crate carried between them, Brenner's eyes going everywhere, and Holt's going nowhere in particular, and Brenner caught her look and gave one short nod. "Stew on," the nod asked, and Elsie's nod said back, "Always," and no questions attached. That was the whole of the conversation, and both of them were satisfied with it. The wandering mug stood where it always stood, timber-fronted and fog-wrapped, and inside it was dim and warm, and smelled of last night's ale and this morning's wood smoke. The common room was long and low, blackened beams overhead, benches scarred by 3 generations of elbows. Wren Barleywick's corner table sitting empty, and somehow still hers. Orrin knelt at the grate, coaxing the coals up with the poker held in his good hand. "Ned says a man who lifts casks with a bad shoulder gets a worse one. He says to tell you he said so." "Ned cuts meat with his elbows out like a hen settling. He can keep his shoulders and I will keep mine." But she marked that he used the good arm for the kettle, and let it go. Daisy lay sprawled where the hearth heat pooled, tail thumping twice as Elsie stepped over her, and the stew pot went on, and the boards got swept, and when they opened the doors, the fog came in for a look around before the morning trade did. By midday, the room had found its balance. Farmers at the corner table with their boots steaming, a traveler by the wall, nursing something warm and watching the door the way travelers did. Bram Tallow came in at his usual hour and set his helmet on the bar, and she had his tankard in front of him before he finished sitting down. "Anything at the gate?" she asked. "Fog." He drank. After a moment, he said, "A lot of it," in the tone of a man who had written the word in a notebook that morning and was not going to say anything more, and she did not ask anything more. When he left, the coin beside the tankard was a little too much, the way it always was. That was Bram apologizing for bringing the gate's weather in with him, and she swept it into the drawer without counting it in front of him, which was her way of accepting. Near the door, the adventurer had taken a seat with his back to the wall. He did not ask for stories, and she did not offer any. She worked the room and listened, which was most of the trade if anyone asked her, though no one ever did. She marked who flinched when the forest came up, who ordered courage by the tankard, who ordered regret and called it ale. She carried it all as she carried the trays, level, and put none of it down. The evening rush came on with the lamps, tankards and laughter, the benches filling, Jory Fife tuning at the hearth end. A mug went off the edge of a tray near the kitchen door, and she caught it against her hip without quite looking at it, and someone cheered, and someone else pretended loudly that he had meant to drop it. Above the hearth, the pixie tugged a napkin into a knot, and was gone before Daisy's head came all the way up. Elsie untied the knot and smoothed the cloth flat, and wasted no curse on it. Curses were what the creature came for. It was late, past the hour when honest custom went home, when the man at the far table brought up the old pact. He did it the way they always did, a joke first, then something that was not quite a joke, then a silence that wanted filling, and his companion laughed too quickly and filled it. Elsie passed close with 2 empty tankards and passed on. Always after midnight, that talk. Always from someone who swore up and down that he did not believe a word of it. She had heard the shape of it often enough to know it by the silences, and she did not repeat what she heard. Some work you did with your hands, and some you did by keeping still. They closed when the last coin found the drawer. Orrin barred the door, and she set the chairs and marked the tabs in the ledger, an accounting of who would pay, who meant to, who needed another day of stew before anyone asked. Daisy had already claimed the hearthstones. The warmth of the room would keep for the ones who slept above the bar. She took her cloak off the peg and the empty basket off the bar and went out into the lanes. The fog had never left. It walked her home past the dark windows, patient as ever, and dripped from her own eaves while she worked the door latch. Boots off, apron folded over the chest. She lay down with the day's faces still sorting themselves behind her eyes, and somewhere in the sorting she fell asleep, and the morning would want bread again, and she would go and fetch it.